So my name's Sarah Scott. I'm the Deputy State Director for Americans for Prosperity here. I'm originally from New Hampshire, so I identify as a Free Stater, but I didn't actually move from anywhere. And with me here, I have Greg Moore, also from Americans for Prosperity, and Representative Dan McGuire as well. I'll let you guys, or Greg, do you want to introduce yourself?
I have an alternate affiliation that's relevant. I'm on the board of Granite State Taxpayers, the state's oldest taxpayer organization, and I am the longest serving board member.
Awesome. Dan is one of our AFP policy champions. He also serves on the Finance Committee, which has the unfortunate duty of spending all the tax dollars that come in. So if you don't like how it's spent, just yell at Dan. My name's Greg Moore. I'm the state director with I'm the regional director with Americans for Prosperity, which gives me a great position because I now have 16 states that I oversee, and all of them are worse than New Hampshire, so right out of the gate. But we've been making some important and steady progress in the space relative to taxes in the last few years. Now, I know Tammy mentioned when she introed us, she said that New Hampshire doesn't have an income tax. Well, that's going to be true. That's soon to be true. That's right. But it is not in fact true right now. Right? Actually, as of today, we have a tax on interest and dividends income, I&D. That goes into the ash bin of history on December 31st of this year. So that's an important win from a lot of the legislators. So
it's a great selling point if you're looking to move here.
Dan has been an absolute staunch advocate for getting rid of that tax. So Dan, I know you always have a few words to say because you hate this tax.
Yeah, I really do, and I've talked about it for a long time. And it's not just because I pay it, right? But and actually, I don't pay it anymore because I give all my money to Kate Baker for EFAs. But this tax, the problem with this tax in general, I mean, the way to look at taxes is when you have a tax, it discourages something, right? So what is it that's being discouraged? That's the problem with an income tax, right? It discourages people from working. Property tax discourages people from fixing up their property and having better quality property. Obviously, cigarette tax discourages people from smoking. Maybe that's not so bad, right? But the interest and dividends tax in particular is discouraging investment and savings. And investment and savings is how tomorrow gets better than today, economically speaking, right? So if we had no investment and no savings, the economy would decline over the years a little bit, right? Because machines wear out and capital, gets worse and so on. But when we invest and save, we have more capital next year than we had this year, which means we're more productive next year than this year, which means our standard of living has gone up, right? So investing in savings and investment is what causes tomorrow to be better than today, meaning that, and that's my definition of happiness, right? If every day you're steadily getting better and better, that's happiness. I don't care where you start from, but getting better, right? But if it's declining, if the economy is declining, that's worse, right? That's unhappiness. So this is a key, this is, in my mind, the worst tax we have. That's why we're getting rid of it.
And it wasn't enough that we just decided we were going to be getting rid of it. We actually accelerated the phase out of that tax as well.
Yeah, and I said in last time that it's important because we don't know if we're going to be in the majority again next time after November, right? And so that the way it's set up now, this is the last year. So the quickest the next legislature could bring it back is July of next year. So it will have been gone completely for 6 months, and therefore they have to start it again, right? So they're introducing a new tax. It's much different than just fiddling with the rates of taxes. The other comment I wanted to make about taxes is people wonder, how can we get away with no income tax, no sales tax, right? That's one of the big three with property tax, right? So we rely very heavily on property tax. The total property tax collected in the state is more than 50% of all taxes, okay, of all kinds. So it's high, but it's primarily local. So if you don't like your property tax, because it's your school is spending 3/4 of property tax, and most of the property tax is local. So if you don't like your property tax, you are to blame. It's your school board that's doing it to you for the most part. But the other thing is, the reason we can avoid having some of those big taxes is because our tax base is very broad. It's very varied. We have some taxes on business, two kinds of taxes on business. We tax cigarettes, we tax cell phones, we tax liquor. We have our own, vehicles.
It's called the fee, but it's technically a tax.
Yeah,
a little bit. That's pretty.
Meals and rentals.
Meals and rooms, hotels, and tourist type taxes. So there's a lot of different taxes, and real estate transfer tax, for example. So because there are so many little taxes, it keeps our income very steady and more easily predictable. And that's very important for budgeting, right? If you're in a state that relies heavily on income tax, the income tax, especially business income, your profits could be up here, and the next year they're down here, and like that. And what happens is, on the good years, they ratchet up their spending, all right? And now the bad year comes, and boy, I'm really used to this level of spending, right? So I can't, but here, because our income is very predictable and constant, we keep our spending predictable and constant, and we don't ratchet up because we don't have the money. So it's very important. I like our tax structure, because I wouldn't say, other than interest and dividends tax, I wouldn't say we should necessarily get rid of taxes, any particular one. We should lower rates, right? So
wow, that's debatable.
Yeah, but because of that, because I want steady, I don't want. That.
The more we're able to cut our spending, the more we're able to cut our tax situation.
Absolutely.
So one of the taxes that you mentioned was the rooms and meals tax, which is a tax basically on tourism. A lot of people ask about how New Hampshire does make money, and that is a big part of it. We're a very tourism-heavy state, so if you're coming up here in the winter, normally we have quite a bit of snow, so we have a lot of people coming for the skiing. In the summertime, people are flooding from everywhere to get to our lakes and the seacoast here. So the rooms and meals tax is a tax on hotel rooms and prepared foods. So if I go to the grocery store and I just buy, like milk, eggs, things like that, that's not going to be taxed. But if I were to buy some kind of pre-prepared food, so if I was going to go next door and order like a sandwich for lunch, there would be a tax on that. So it's a little bit of a distinction there. And this tax was actually recently lowered in 2021, I believe. We went from a tax of 9% down to 8.5%. So that tax is something that primarily we're taxing the tourists here, so it doesn't hit a lot of Granite Staters on a day-to-day basis. But then in addition to that, he mentioned taxes on businesses. We also take in quite a bit of revenue from business taxes. So we have two business taxes, the business profits tax and the business enterprise tax. Does one of you want to explain a little bit about what each of those are?
Sure. So New Hampshire has always tried to find a way to try to insulate taxes from the individual. The per capita tax in New Hampshire is second lowest in the U.S. and only behind Alaska. And in Alaska, they literally have to pay you to live there. So when you think about it in that perspective, we don't have to pay people to live in New Hampshire. But we have the second lowest at the state level. In fact, when you add in the local taxes as well, we're still in the top four in terms of overall tax burden. But one of the areas we do tax is on businesses. And we have two taxes. One is on profits, which is a typical corporate profits tax that is paid by most states and the federal government, where they just take a piece of the action. And in New Hampshire, we have a provision in our Constitution, which is actually a phenomenal provision that requires that all taxes have to be uniformly applied and broadly based, which is good because we don't end up getting these really industry-specific taxes that are just sort of dropped in there that a lot of states do, where the state is using the tax code to pick winners and losers. But one of the provisions of it is that there was a legal case that was brought up starting in the late 80s that said, hey, look, if I organize myself as an LLC and just take all the profits as pay for myself, then I don't have to pay any taxes. And the court said, yeah, you're right, the business profits by itself doesn't work. So what the courts required is that they bring in this thing called the business enterprise tax, which is a little bit more of a unique tax. It's basically a payroll tax, but that's a tax that is a troubling one for us because businesses that are losing money are still having to pay taxes, and you don't want to drive a business into the ground. But fundamentally, one of the things that we started when I started with AFP in 2013 is we made it a priority to really focus on business competitiveness. And while we don't have a traditional, we don't have tax wages or have a general sales tax, we had high business taxes. And so we made it a huge priority to try to reduce that. We actually had the highest business taxes in New England, which to me is absolutely unacceptable. Subsequent to that, we've made 5 rounds of tax relief for the business profits tax and 4 rounds of tax relief for the business enterprise tax. It's kind of hard to predict because it's not quite apples to apples because some of our neighbors have graduated business taxes. But on the whole, our business tax competitiveness is considered to be now far and away the best in New England because of the tax relief that various general courts have put in place. And the successes of that is the proof is in the pudding. If you look at our state's GDP growth per capita before we started the tax relief, and you look at it now, we've gone from lagging states like Massachusetts to our GDP growth is almost double that of Massachusetts on a percentage basis. And that to me, much like Dan was talking about, that to me is success because when you start to see GDP growth take off the way it is, you end up with a virtuous cycle. And now businesses all want to come here. The biggest problem we have right now is businesses. A lot of businesses that I talk to in other parts of New England, I'll say they'd love to come to New Hampshire, but where am I going to find the workforce?
Yeah, and
that's a legit concern. Is like, okay, we want even more growth. We have a lot of economic growth. We want even more growth, and we're having some limitations that we just can't find the people. And one of the problems, of course, is if you can't find the people, if you can't build the houses to put them in. So we have a little bit of a problem in terms of that. And in a price-coordinated, market-based economy, one law you can't repeal is the law of supply and demand. And when we have our neighbors making really bad decisions, like Massachusetts, which said, "Hey, look, let's really whack high income earners." Well, guess what happens? Those high income earners move to New Hampshire, buying, and of course they can afford to buy the houses because they're paying cash. They don't have to worry about financing or mortgages. They can jump right in, pay cash. Do it without inspection. And, of course, if you're a buyer, that's just what you're looking for. And we're driving our real estate prices through the roof at a time when interest rates would seem to suggest just the opposite. Our actual valuations are going up like crazy in the state. That's a first world problem. I mean, but it does lead to second order effects. Like, for example, a lot of people trying to move to New Hampshire are going to find a really challenging real estate market just as a consequence of the fact that the supply and demand have a huge imbalance. But these are the consequences of good policy decisions being made by the legislature. We just have to get rid of some of the problems at the local level that are interrupting that supply and demand imbalance.
Yeah, I have a bill co-sponsored in the Senate bill that I'm co-sponsoring, which would allow towns to put tax caps on both either their school district or their town, similar to what cities now have, right? So, yeah, I have a statistic about Massachusetts. Since they put in their millionaire's tax or whatever they're calling it, they're losing $1 billion worth of income every year, and of that, 50% moves to Florida, 25% moves to New Hampshire, and 25% moves somewhere else. So,
but I think that from an overall tax structure perspective, we've put an intense focus on just competitiveness. We say, look, it's not good enough to just say, we don't have a sales or income tax. It's like, okay, where are the areas where we can find opportunities? As Dan said, taxes represent incentives. How can we find ways to become more competitive? The business taxes have been one. And in some areas, for example, like on tobacco, yes, it does disincentivize, but when we don't make the bad policy decisions to just keep jacking up tobacco taxes, we end up with a situation, and you'll notice it pretty quickly. If you drive into New Hampshire, if you drive over a border, whether it's on Route 28 or Route 1, what's the first thing you see when you drive over the border in New Hampshire? Cigarettes. Cigarettes. That's a little. Well, yeah, in a liquor store. That's a fun one, by the way. It's one of those ones that it creates a conflict, and I know that the legislators find there's a conflict when it comes to alcohol in terms of actually liquor. New Hampshire controls liquor. Beer and wine you can buy at any convenience store, but when it comes to liquor, New Hampshire has a monopoly on that. And while that's generally bad, one of the second order effects is that the federal government says, if the state owns it, then you don't have to pay the federal excise tax. So we have cheap liquor, but maybe not all the different types you might want if there were a true, honest-to-goodness free market in place. But that's one where we said, okay, we're willing to have the free market interruption of not allowing private liquor sale so that we can avoid taxes. But those are some of the trade-offs that legislators have to make constantly when we think about public policy.
Yeah, if you look up per capita consumption of alcohol in New Hampshire, we're twice as high as national average, right?
Drunks.
So we're all drunks. No, it's because we're selling half of the stuff to out-of-staters, right?
Which is another great way for us to make money. We do have a lot of people. If you'll notice when you drive around the state that our liquor stores are all right off of the highway, right on like the state lines. We absolutely put them there for a reason. So we do make good profit off of that.
Yeah. Two of the biggest ones are right in the 93 rest stop areas.
Want to make it easy for people.
It's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence. No, but as we look at the mosaic, one of the things that is different and separates New Hampshire, certainly from the federal level, and even from other states, is our willingness to take the medicine in bad times. That's one of the things that really I think separates New Hampshire. In 2011 and 12, Dan was certainly up there. We did something extraordinary. We passed a state budget, that budget to budget, and Tammy was there. We passed a state budget that in terms of overall total spending, cut spending by 11%. 11%. And then it also cut the general fund, which is the state taxpayer portion, by 18%. That's something that was truly extraordinary and historic, and New Hampshire's willingness to do that is pretty impressive. If you look at fiscal year 2021, the dollars were coming in pretty well in 2021. We said, you know what? We still think we're spending too much. We cut overall spending by 4% and general fund spending by 6% in the good times. So that's one thing that's really significant in terms of legislators in New Hampshire is the fact that they're willing to take our medicine in good times. And I'm willing to bet that if there's a decent majority, you'll look back at the budget and say, you know what, it's still spending too much. Let's cut it back a little bit more. How many people here have ever thought about running for state legislature? A few folks. So 2 years. You only have to live in New Hampshire for 2 years. It's not a huge lift to become a state rep. It really isn't. And one of the things that I depending on where you live. Actually, well, if you're willing to do like Mark Warden and just keep moving around districts so you find good districts, then I think it's pretty easy to get elected state representative, and you can go up to Concord and actually make a real difference. You can make a real difference. You say, oh, you're one of 400. I got to tell you what, Dan McGuire makes a huge difference in the legislature every year. And and really it comes down to are you willing to lead with principle? Because I think people notice that if you're willing to lead with principle. And are you willing to actually put into work? And if you're willing to lead on principle and put in work, you'll quickly develop a reputation. And are you willing to literally just focus on the issues and not the political side? Because there's a lot of people just want to have fun politically. Great, but if you are serious about issues and you're focused and you're willing to put the work in, 1 of 400 doesn't mean anything. Any one of you can go up there and make a huge impact. By the way, full disclosure, I worked for the legislature, which means I was paid considerably more than the legislators. Yeah, I got more than $100 a year. I used to be the chief of staff of the New Hampshire House, and I'll tell you this much: if you want to come to New Hampshire, you can move to a state where you can move here, be here 2 years, get elected, and then may have an impact on public policy almost immediately.
But when you're looking at where to move to, do talk to Mark about what district you're looking at.
Or Dan or somebody.
Anybody, yeah.
So we have a couple minutes left, maybe for one question or two. We have time? Okay, we'll do some questions. Yeah.
Do you think there's any value in being a delegate to the state convention for the Republican Party? You can do that immediately, as I understand it?
Yes, I think that would be a great question for some of the next panelists.
Now, I will say this much: I have been a delegate in the past. It really depends on if you're focused on the policy or the politics. If you're really focused on the policy, it's perhaps not as important. But if you're interested in the politics, it's very important. And it's a great tool to get to know people if you're just getting here and you want to get to know people within sort of the power structure of the Republican Party. And I'll say this much, and I'm sure Ryan will come and reiterate that. One thing about New Hampshire and the Republican Party, unlike other states, the New Hampshire Republican Party is not trying to push out libertarians. They are absolutely not trying to push out libertarians. They understand that with libertarians, Republicans can be a majority party in New Hampshire, but without them, they can't. That's why. But the willingness to embrace liberty representatives, the willingness to embrace liberty individuals, and not try to cast them out of the party. And I say that because other states do this. They try to force libertarians out of the party. It's a purity test. And if you don't vote the party line 100% of the time, they just want you gone. We don't do that in New Hampshire. I'm a delegate. I'm not a delegate anymore. I'm a voting member of the state party, and I would say that maybe 50% of the voting members of the state party are definitely liberty aligned.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. Okay, we'll go over here.
My name is Tom Mercado. I drove up from Burlington, Vermont this morning, and I've lived there about 30 years, and I'm thinking of moving here to New Hampshire.
I think it says it on. Does it say it on your badge? Is that what you put on your badge? Does your badge say I'm thinking of moving?
No.
Somebody's badge says I'm thinking of moving.
My question is, I've watched Vermont over the last 30 years just be inundated with the progressive party. And if you saw what happened in Burlington a week or two ago, the progressive beat the Democrat for Burlington's mayor. And it was a shock to the city. And the progressives have essentially displaced the Republican Party in Vermont as the second party. And I'm wondering, and I've seen that happen over decades. And my question is, have they started to infiltrate New Hampshire politics, the progressive ideology? Have they really gotten into the political culture of
It's part of a broader movement across the left, just generally. That is people, and I think that a lot of it comes from Bernie Sanders, and he sort of started that movement of, and I think we see it among the young people, the folks on the left. I was talking with a longtime political reporter, Kevin Landrigan, and he goes to, obviously he has to go to Democratic events and Republican events, and he was telling me point blank, he said, it's incredible, Greg. All the young people, all of them are anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian. All of them are somewhere on the gender spectrum that isn't what you'd consider to be traditional. And that's where all the energy is on the left right now. And that's true in Vermont and New Hampshire. By the way, I like to call Vermont Bizarro New Hampshire. but it's it's kind of, they look, if you flip them, they look kind of aside, and their seacoast is the same as Lake Champlain. But no, I think that here's something to consider about New Hampshire. New Hampshire is the way it is, and sticks out like a sore thumb in the Northeast because we are, the people who are here for a reason. People are coming here for a reason. Consider this. According to the U.S. Census in 2020, of the people who live in New Hampshire, adults who live in New Hampshire, 64% of them were not born in New Hampshire. So it's a selection bias. People are coming to New Hampshire from the Northeast because they want to get away from where they are to find what we have. So to the extent do I think that the progressives will take over? I don't think so. Because it's not talking about a movement of the same people. It's the people are mixing so much, and the people who are coming here are not coming for progressive politics. If you wanted progressive politics, you would not leave Vermont to come to New Hampshire. But there are homegrown people, particularly young people, who are being indoctrinated in this stuff and they're here. We still have young people here. I know they can't find any place to buy, but they're still here. So that's my thought. Dan?
Yeah, I would say there's the Democratic Party in the House had a very close election for who was going to be their leader, and the progressive won, but it wasn't, as I understand it, I mean, obviously I wasn't in the room, but the progressive beat the traditional Democrat by something, but I think it was very close. And I would say, generally speaking, you're right about young people, but I don't think it's certainly not 100% in the House. We have a very prominent young Democrat who is not a progressive, and when we had a bill to forbid transgender surgery of minors, he got up and spoke in favor of this bill, and when he was done speaking, there was almost an altercation in the anteroom where he was surrounded by the others, but at least there's some that are not quite that bad. So, yeah.
All right, we had one other question, right?
Tim had a question.
Okay, here.
I'm from Massachusetts in the Boston area, and I'm just curious, has the movement of illegal migrants in New Hampshire affected the politics in any way?
I would say no. New Hampshire really does not have a very large population. Now, that might be there might be more of an impact in a city like Manchester, for example. But when you look at like the state as a whole, there's really not an influx of illegal immigrants coming from the southern border, the northern border. It's not really an issue aside from like a couple of key areas like Manchester, Nashua.
I would say not as much. And I was born and raised in Boston, so I've been down there, and I know exactly what you're talking about. First of all, we don't offer the types of services that Massachusetts does. We're not a sanctuary state, so you can't get a driver's license here. You can in Mass. So just structurally, there are a lot of things that aren't in place to sort of support the pull that a state like Massachusetts is offering, or a state like New York. And I would say that creates a challenge. Not only that, but we have no place to put them. We just don't have any place to put them. And yes, exactly. There's no place for them to go. So, but I mean, look, there's always been. If you go to the back room of any restaurant in Manchester or Nashua, you're probably going to find a few people, a few illegal aliens there. But that's always been true. I don't think we've seen a particular influx since Biden took over.
I mean, if we're talking about the restaurants, we could make the case we need a few more. If you've been to the restaurants here, service is not always great. We are very short-staffed. And we had one more question the way back.
Don't be taxing my Amazon.
So the challenge there, is again, we have a provision in our state constitution that says all taxes need to be uniformly applied and broadly based. And so if you want to start picking the people to tax, you're probably going to run into some real legal difficulties. So that creates a challenge, and I think that's a great thing. By the way, I don't want the government picking winners or losers. I want a pretty even policy for everyone. And I mean, I know that we've gone round and round on internet sales tax because, of course, with the Supreme Court allowing the internet sales tax, that creates a greater challenge. But I would say we don't want to get in that space. We don't want to be in a place where the government's picking winners and losers. That's never good for liberty.
And it's very important that everybody have a say. They're part of the game, right? Because if you say this group is not taxed, well, what's their incentive to not vote for more stuff for themselves, right? Because these guys are paying for it, you know.
Tax not thee, tax not me, tax that fellow behind the tree.
Yeah, exactly. So everybody, that's the advantage of property tax is, number one, everybody knows what they're paying. They're writing a check twice a year, all right? You're paying business taxes. You're paying all these other taxes, too, but you have no idea how much it is, right? But the property tax, it's in your face. And so it's not the worst tax in the world.
It's transparent, too. Like, I can go to the Manchester taxpayer, and I can see what every single person's tax bill is.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right, are we out of time?
Thank you, guys.
Great.
Thank you.
That's our tax people.